You know, whenever I think about Luanne haters bashing on Luanne herself in episodes like April Fool's Wars, Fool's Paradise, and Fool Me Twice, and then whenever they think about episodes like No Laughing Matter on the fact that Luanne is easily dumbed down because of her eavesdropping her siblings, I'm just gonna say this right now. I found someone gossiping behind the family's back much more worse than what anything Luanne did in No Laughing Matter. Granted, when it comes to the April Fool's episodes, it's debatable, but for me personally, gossiping is a lot more worse than doing puns and doing harmless pranks. So for today's Loud House vs. Casagrandes project, it will be about Luanne giving up comedy while Hector, let's just say that he is so unstable that even if it may be part of his character at times, it really feels like that they wanted to make the Casagrandes family have a lot of problems, but not for the right reasons, unlike the Loud family. In No Laughing Matter, Luanne gives out invitations to her siblings since that she is practicing herself at a comedy club called the Cholo Portal, but after eavesdropping her siblings on how annoying she is, she gives up completely. In Cut the Chisme, after being really annoyed and fed up with Hector's gossiping around the town, well, mainly from the Mikado, but mainly the customers he's been gossiping to, the Casagrandes took matters into their own hands by having Hector stop with the gossiping. You know, considering that this has somewhat of a similarities of No Laughing Matter, the only difference is that the Loud family is just trying to have Luanne get back into the gig since that they didn't knew that Luanne was eavesdropping on them. But if I'm gonna be honest with you, even though I've already talked about Force of Habits last month, even if this habit is part of Hector, I'm still siding with the Casagrandes because at the same time, if this was the first time that this ever happened, then I don't even understand why the Hector needs an episode centering around this. Because if I'm gonna be honest, the Hector episodes, since I reviewed Taco the Town, comparing it to Cookie Dough, there were a few occasions where he was a good character, but in this, it really feels like that he's mainly a plot device for the other characters, and the fact that he's the main character of this episode is really saying a lot. In comparison to the Loud House, I'm gonna be really honest with you, since that this episode came out after Under Pressure, well, the characters need to give up their habits in order to win, and the fact that Force of Habits just makes Lori, Lenny, and Luna unlikable, I'm gonna be real with you that in this episode, they didn't want Luanne to stop. Like, yeah, they couldn't stand her. When Luanne eavesdropped on the conversation. And if I'm gonna be really honest with you, anyone who goes through this scenario would feel what the Loud siblings would react to after the pranks and gags that Luanne did to them. And considering that this has nothing to do with April Fools whatsoever, it gives Luanne development on being more down to earth, which is something that made me appreciate her character since I've watched this episode for the first time. And believe me when I say this, even though that Fool Me Twice came out after this episode, I still found this episode as an example of how Luanne could be a better character, on how she takes things seriously than expected. And believe me when I say this, when she takes things seriously, I mean the right way, unlike how she was portrayed in Brawl in the Family with her argument with Luna. Which leads to the Casagrandes episode, well, it's not being taken seriously and mainly a filler episode at most. Like, if Hector isn't going to stop gossiping behind his family's back, then it's really questionable on how he manages to get away if he's been doing this for so long. Like, if I'm gonna be really honest with you, if I really had the knowledge of gossiping families behind their backs, it would be mainly out of payback, but at the same time, it wouldn't be out of nothingness. Because as far as I'm concerned, I just don't understand the enjoyment that Hector does whenever he does this type of stuff. Unlike Luanne, who is part of the comedy gig, who really wants to perform at the Cholo Portal. And yes, I understand that this is supposed to be an addiction, but how is gossiping to other people an addiction? Like, I just don't understand that. Like, the addiction I would understand is eating sweets and playing video games and most of that stuff, but considering that Hector doesn't do any of that type of stuff, it just makes me questions onto how that there isn't an episode where he has an addiction towards food, rather than gossiping in front of people behind his family's back. Because I just don't get it. Like, I really don't get that this is his addiction. While in Luanne, I can totally understand onto how comedy can be her addiction. And knowing the fact that Luanne is way longer than Hector, 50 years apart, by possibly, it really makes sense for Luanne to deal with these struggles and the criticisms that she heard from her siblings, even though that they didn't meet them entirely. Because let me tell you, with episodes like Head's Perks Anxiety coming out after this episode, it made me understand that Luanne is more than a character who's obsessed with comedy. And even if people wanted her to be in Force of Habits, I'm just gonna be honest with you, she will probably be unlikable like Lori, Lenny, and Luna, who were so furious at the fact that their relationships, Bobby, Gavin, and Sam, will politely tell them to cut off their habits for one day. Tell me, do you really think that Benny would do the same thing, despite the fact that he is into comedy just like Luanne? I'm just gonna say this right now, it will probably make Benny mostly out of character for telling Luanne to not do any puns or anything else comedy related for one day to enjoy their time in Dairyland. You see on to why I still do not like Force of Habits even after people express their opinions towards that episode that isn't negative. There's a reason on to why that the Loud siblings seriously need to learn beforehand rather than just repeating the same mistakes as before. As far as I'm concerned, I'd rather see Lincoln being called out on which habit he has, so just to see how he can handle it better than his sisters. And I'm not saying that just to prove that Lincoln is a better character than his sisters. In the Casagrandes episode, after many failed attempts, the family goes to Greta in order to put a curse or a spell on Hector to stop gossiping. You know, considering that this is the second or third time we get to see Greta after she turned Bobby into a cat, or unintentionally, I can't remember the episode completely, I still don't blame the family. Because if Hector is literally being in this position where he can't control himself, I'm just gonna say this right now, Luanne has better self-control than Hector. Mainly the fact that she can actually take criticism a little seriously, but when it comes to Hector, I don't think that he'll ever take criticism seriously, considering that he's been gossiping behind his family's back through the majority of this episode. Well, mainly the first 2 minutes, but by the looks of it, it really feels like that they included this development into Hector for the sake of conflict. But this is where they include a loophole for the reasonings of Hector's gossiping. Because if Hector doesn't gossip whatsoever without any information, the Casagrandes family wouldn't get any information on what is really going on. mainly the citizens outside of the Mikado dealing with hardships, and since that they didn't realize it and just making the Kyoto's feelings more hurtful, this is stupid. I'm sorry, but this is really, really stupid. It makes me question onto how no one in the Casagrandes family figured this out way ahead of time, to the point that it really makes them convinced that Hector's gossiping was a good thing after all. So, are you meaning to tell me that not a single person in this entire family, aside from Hector, can give out information on what is really going on with a friend's lives, mainly in the apartment or elsewhere? I find it difficult to believe. Like, out of all the times I've seen this family helping each other out and doing more information on what is really going on, I don't buy it. Like, I really, really do not buy it. You see, the reason why I don't see this as a flaw when it comes to families, mainly the Casagrandes in comparison to the Lau family, is because it really feels like the weirdest and most unrealistic way of having a problem with one family member having this disadvantage in the family that really makes them miss information on what's really important. Like, this is nowhere near as bad as the sisters not telling Lincoln about the sister fight protocol from Brawl in the family, but really, this is literally the best they can come up with? No. And the sad thing is that in comparison to No Laughing Matter, do you honestly think that Luanne making jokes along with pranking her siblings will qualify as giving them information on other things? No. The only information that she gave to them is that she's going to be performing at the Troller Portal, which is literally all she wanted her siblings to know so that they can watch her perform at the Troller Portal. And to be honest, the fact that Luanne acts more mature towards her siblings, knowing full well that she knows what's going on, just sums up a lot onto why I prefer No Laughing Matter over the Casagrandes episode. Believe me, I understand that Luanne's siblings were trying to help, but at the same time, this also showcases of how much Luanne has a brain that she uses correctly, and she uses it correctly in episodes before, like Funny Business. And while sure, the other Loud siblings were still mature, but not on the same level as Luanne throughout this entire episode, they were still willing to help out Luanne over something that they didn't mean to cause. And to be perfectly real with you, the fact that they're willing to help out Luanne so that she can perform not only at the Troller Portal, but gain back into the comedy business is really saying something. Believe me, if we ended up having this version of Luanne after this episode without the Loud siblings helping out or finding a solution, then we wouldn't probably have the third episode involving April Fools, which could be a good thing, but at the same time, we wouldn't have heads towards anxiety. And in all honesty, just seeing the Casagrandes just trying to have Hector gossip, I'm not buying it. It's really stupid, to the point that it just makes me question onto how difficult it is for the Casagrandes to handle information by themselves without the assistance of Hector. I mean, after, even if it was accidental, embarrassed one of his closest friends, then it just makes me question onto how people would take gossiping as an important thing for the family when it comes to information, because it just doesn't, and the fact that the other characters who aren't part of the Casagrandes aren't the main characters to call out Hector on his gossiping just makes me question a lot of things. As for the ending itself from the Casagrandes, it's stupid. Like, the bit where Hector's head gets bigger after holding on to his gossips for far too long, and that somehow breaks the spell that he had in the middle of the episode. I'm not buying it. Like, I'm not even buying it for a bit, and the fact that it just goes away after he gossips, it makes no sense. It just shows how poorly written this entire episode is. Let's be real, seeing Lincoln going on stage and doing terrible jokes just so that Luanne can perform and get back into the comedy business, it's way more better. In fact, it beats the ending from the Casagrandes by a landslide. Let's be real, if we ever see this type of ending, well, Hector becomes a gossip comedian, if that's somewhat possible, I'm pretty sure that he would not be able to get a job, unlike Luanne when it comes to outside of the facility, mainly the Mikado from the Casagrandes, and the fact that Luanne is mainly being in the position that she was this close of if it wasn't for her siblings' new approach of plans, mainly Lincoln performing poorly on stage. If I ever wish that gossip comedians were a thing, I still think that that gossip and comedian still won't go together, because the ending where Luanne was this close of controlling himself only for Loe to say let it out, it's realistic, unlike Hector from the Casagrandes episode holding on gossips. It just makes me think that Luanne has better self-control even when she can't help herself. You know, whenever I look at these types of episodes and I've came to the conclusion that they're similar to episodes like No Laughing Matter, it really shows that whenever the Casagrandes don't have ideals on making episodes, even when they take ideals from the Loud House, they can't be able to come up with better storytelling ideals when they're focusing on characters like Hector. Because let me tell you, the fact that Hector gets an episode centered around him controlling his gossip habits, while No Laughing Matter is mainly about Luanne learning about the distress that she heard from her siblings. Why do people hate these episodes? Like, the most infamous ones I can understand, but it just makes me question onto why, even if I understand that people do not watch the Casagrandes, when they got to the episode involving Hector's gossiping, should they actually think about how harsh they were towards Luanne? Like, the Luanne haters, obviously, but when people are being fairly critical, maybe at the same time, they should look at some episodes involving the Casagrandes to see that they can still do worse, even if they do better in some occasions. Cut the Chisme isn't one of the worst episodes from the Casagrandes, but it's definitely one of the most weakest episodes. Like, even though that if you find this episode entertaining, keep in mind, you're also remembering the fact that it's similar to No Laughing Matter, considering that Luanne has better self-control than Hector, which is really, really weird to think about, considering that she doesn't during April Fools. But considering that I've only talked about Luanne in a few bits involving these videos, there's a chance that I might get into another comparison between her and an episode from the Casagrandes to see if she is better or worse than the Casagrandes episode. But again, it would take time for me to get to that when I get the chance of coming up with an ideal. Because let me tell you, if Luanne wasn't part of Force of Habits, it's literally for the best. Keep in mind there are good Luanne episodes even in the later seasons, but at the same time, I still need to find another Luanne episode that is better over the Casagrandes episode. And considering that I did that way earlier when it comes to Feast or Family, along with Misstep, there are still few ideals lying there that is led to be reviewed from perspective. Mainly my perspective, that is. As for Hector, there's another episode from Season 3 that I'm gonna be comparing it to an episode involving Linso from Season 7 from the Loud House. Let me tell you, There's a reason onto why that Hector's character is way more difficult to enjoy whenever he's the focus. Coral, despite getting way more episodes than anyone else, has manages to become slightly likable than Hector, which is somewhat saying a lot. I'm giving No Laughing Matter an 8 out of 10, while Cut the Chisme gets a 4.75 out of 10.